Not all seasons created equal. We already said at the top of the show, but some of these teams have higher stakes in 2023 than maybe some other teams across the country. And let's start in Norman, Oklahoma. Because for Oklahoma, they leave for the SEC in 2024. And they're going into their second year for Brent Venables. And my main question for Oklahoma is, which way is the arrow pointing as they leave the Big 12 conference? And you know what I'm talking about here. The way that they leave the Big 12 is going to be a very big jumping off point for when they get to the SEC, especially for recruiting, because you won 6 games last year, had a lot of close games, a lot of close losses, rather, for the good folks in Norman. But when they get to the SEC, the difficulty level just gets turned up a little bit. And that's no shade on the Big 12. That's just the reality. It's different playing Kansas one week than it is playing Tennessee and Alabama and Georgia and LSU. Like, you hear what I'm saying. So for Oklahoma, if they were to win 8 or 9 games this coming year, you can go talk to recruits and say, okay, we won 6 games the first year, starting to get this thing headed the right direction, won 9 games the next year. Hey, come be a part of what we're doing here. We get to the SEC, man. This thing is about to blow up. We want you a part of this. Or you have that conversation with recruits after you win 6 games again, or maybe you make a 1-win improvement and you win 7 games. If I'm a recruit and you're telling me the difficulty is about to increase and I'm seeing a very small improvement from year to year, or dare I say, maybe you just stay the same, that's not something you want to really be sitting with as you head into the SEC. And so for Oklahoma, that's the big question. Which way is the arrow pointing? Is there progress? Is there something to push to recruits as you leave to the SEC? So a very big impact year for the good folks in Norman, Oklahoma. Another impact team. How about the South Carolina Gamecocks? We'll talk about them in just a second. Really quickly, though, make sure you're subscribed right here. We talk college football every day. Y'all that have been with us for a minute, you already know the drill. If you're new, welcome. No time like the present. Jump on in, all right? So for South Carolina, here's the big thing for them. Going into year 3 for Shane Beamer, they've overachieved based on what Vegas says the last couple of years. And don't look now. We're going to talk about recruiting later in the show. Don't look now. South Carolina dealing with a top 10 class. Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks have a top 10 class right now in the 2024 On3 industry team recruiting rankings. So the way that I see it, for South Carolina, you have poured gasoline all over this thing. Like all over the recruiting trail, you're just taking your can of gasoline and spraying it everywhere. Now, that's great, but you and I both understand this. That's only going to be as good or burn as bright as if you're able to light a match to it. And so for South Carolina, what would light a match to that gasoline they've poured on the recruiting trail and help them capitalize on it? Some wins in 2023. What if they were to win 9 games or have another big time victory over a high ranked team like they did last year? It's all about proving that South Carolina is not just a good story. Like Shane Beamer said last year, and I wholeheartedly believe that. I don't believe South Carolina is just a good story, but they got to take it to the 2023 season and be able to capitalize on the momentum they've created now. So for Texas A&M, another impact year. Another impact team we got to talk about, because right now the concern that I have for Texas A&M is the optics, the way that it looks from the outside, looking at what's going on in College Station, because they've got a lot of talent. And I know that there's a lot made of the guys that transferred out and the way they've recruited as of late, but y'all, from 2019 to 2022, Texas A&M had a top 10 class every single year. One of those, they had the top-ranked class in the country. So what I'm saying is the roster is really, really solid. I think everybody would agree that Texas A&M last year underachieved. But here's the thing now. If you're Texas A&M and you're trying to recruit Johnny Five-Star, Johnny Five-Star is probably going to have a little bit of hesitation because he sees other 5-stars in his position from previous classes go to Texas A&M and either, 1, transfer out, or 2, they don't get developed to the degree you would hope they get developed, and that translates and shows itself in losses. Last year, perfect example. Texas A&M wasn't a 5-win football team based on their roster, but you saw what happened on the field, and you saw the way that they didn't meet expectations. And so the reason why this is an impact year for Texas A&M, it's not good enough just to win 6 games. It's not good enough just to make a bowl game in College Station. You haven't recruited at that level. You don't have a head coach that coaches at that level. He's got some jewelry. Like, the bar is set much higher in College Station than what they're achieving. And so as Texas and Oklahoma join the SEC, that gets a little more crowded in the state of Texas recruiting for SEC talent. Gets a little bit more crowded on, the pitches you're making to these recruits. If I'm a kid in the Lone Star State and I want to play in the SEC, I can stay home and go to Texas. I don't have to just go to Texas A&M anymore. That's not the only SEC school in the Lone Star State anymore. And so this is a very big year for them to say, you know what, last year, not what we expected, not what any of us wanted, not what any of us are okay with, and then be able to kind of dry erase last year and be successful in 2023. And I think some of that looks like, I hate to keep saying 9 wins. Let's say 8 wins for Texas A&M. If they can win 8 games, that shows a little bit of an improvement, a little bit of a progression. I say a little bit. It would be a big jump from what they did last year. I think it would be more in line with what you expect from their roster, and you can pitch that to recruits going forward. I keep talking about recruiting because we all understand this. College football, the lifeblood of this sport, is recruiting. You cannot win without talent. Now, you can have talent and still lose, and Texas A&M proved that last year, but you can't win without talent. And where do you acquire that talent? The recruiting trail. You can retool via the portal, but you don't really want to live through the portal. All right? And I guarantee you Texas A&M is no different. Last thing we got to talk about here with an impact season for 2023, let's go down to Coral Gables. We've talked about the Miami Hurricanes here a fair amount the last couple of shows here on the Hard Count. And for Miami, there's got to be a sense of urgency, and it's not necessarily totally fair for Miami because they're only going into year 2, much like Oklahoma is. But the sense of urgency and the reason why it's an impact year is because of what's around you. Let's start with just the talent that's around you. I say talent in terms of where you have to draw from on the recruiting trail. Like Florida is arguably the top state to recruit from. And then the other piece of that is who you're competing with. You have one, Florida State, who's a team that is currently in the top 10 of the On3 industry team recruiting rankings. So they're starting to see some dividends from what they did, a couple of seasons and built to last season with a great year last year. And they're hoping to have a college football playoff berth this coming year. Like they're what's hot right now in the state of Florida. Then next to them, you got the Florida Gators. And say what you want about Billy Napier, he prioritizes recruiting. He does. So Florida is going to be a player and they're going to be a brand on the recruiting trail that you got to deal with year in and year out. It's just the way it is for Miami. And so even though it's only year 2, I need you to recreate what I believe of your team. And what I mean by that is last year, Miami probably had a better roster than what they achieved. So all I'm asking for Miami is just achieve what your roster is asking you to achieve. Go win 8 games. If you can win 8 games, you get the over, I believe, on what Vegas is saying you're going to do. Like, that's great. Then we can say, all right, look at the way this thing is headed. There's a common thread here across all of these teams, and that's trajectory. What is the trajectory of Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Miami? What do they look like going forward? This is a big year to set the tone on the recruiting trail and what you're pitching through the transfer portal and just the overall temperature of that program and that fan base. Like this, there's a lot to unpack here, but impact years are definitely on the horizon for all 4 of those teams. Get your popcorn ready. Going to be a fun year across the college football landscape, especially for those teams and what they have ahead of them. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.